So I am excited to pick up volume 5 at some point. I think that's it. No, I think there's 6 out. It's still coming out, so I'm trying to remember how many are out now, how many, like where how many are out is at. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this. Let me try that again. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my August/Orilium wrap-up. So in August, I participated in the Orilium Autumnal Equinox edition of the Magical Readathon, which is hosted by G over at Book Roast. I vlogged the entire month as I usually do, so I will leave the vlogs down below, as well as her announcement video if you somehow missed what the heck that's about. But it's basically like you go to a magical school and you take certain classes, and certain classes align with certain prompts. So that's what I did. I did read a couple of things, I think, beyond what I had planned. Well, let's just talk about August first. August was the month where I made the plan and then I didn't listen to the plan at all. I got very into a very specific reading mood. I'd been in a fantasy romance mood for the past like 3 months, and then I started off the month with some contemporary romance and it just spiraled, and that is all I wanted to read. So I did read other things besides contemporary romance, but like looking at my list, there's a lot of contemporary romance on this list. So that's really what happened, is I had a plan and then it just went out the window because I changed my mind on everything. So with that being said, I think I was able to, everything that I read, I think I was able to fit into the Magical Readathon and like for some prompts, but I didn't talk about everything in my vlogs. So I will chapter this video as I usually do with the books that I read so that you guys have an idea if there's a specific book that I read that you want to learn about. But with that being said, let's dive into the stats. So in the month of August, I read 13 books total, which is pretty good considering the last couple of months I have not been reading that many. And this was over about 4,367 pages and about 114 and a half hours listened. And this is over 4 audiobooks, 3 ebooks, 1 physical book, and 5 mixed. So a lot more ebooks this month. I usually don't read that many, so that's exciting. My age category was very adult, let's just say. I read 1 YA book and the rest of them were adult, so a total of 12 adult books. So I did not break up the genre, not the genre, the age category as I usually do. I think I usually have some other stuff in there, but not this month. My genres were pretty normal for me. I think I had 3 fantasy, 7 romance, 1 contemporary, and 2 nonfiction. And then ratings were pretty, I would say, normal for me, sort of. I had 4 5 stars, 5 4 stars, 3 3 stars, and 1 DNF. The first one that I picked up was Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, which is kind of in this collection of STEM romances that she's been doing. None of them relate to each other, like they're not a series, but they all do have a woman in STEM and they kind of relate to STEM. So this follows Levi and Bee, and they knew each other when they were in, I believe it was grad school, when they went to school together, and she has always assumed that Levi hated her. And so they end up having to work together for NASA. She is a neuroengineer. And so, is that really what her title is? Either way, he's an engineer, she's about the brain, and they're working on these helmets for NASA astronauts. And so it's the two of them and they have to work together, but she being a woman and she being the only person, it's her and her like assistant that are in like the brain side of the project. Everyone else is an engineer, which Levi is in charge of. Everyone goes to him and not her, even though they're co-leads. And so there's a lot about sexism in the workplace, and there's a lot about her being a woman. I really enjoyed the story of Levi and Bee. It's an enemies to lovers, it's kind of situation, miscommunication a little bit at the beginning. I just love Levi as a character. I think he is genuinely the sweetest person, and he cares so much, and it doesn't always come out the right way, but he cares so much. And so you've got the two of them having to work together, and it goes from there. One thing that I can't remember if it was true in the love hypothesis, but it's true here, and I feel like it was true in the other one, but maybe not 100. What I'm trying to say is that the writing was very funny. I laughed out loud multiple times at Bee's inner monologue, and I just liked the way she looked at the world. So I remember loving the way that The Love Hypothesis was written, but I think it's a little bit different because of the main character. So I adored this. This got 5 stars. Obviously, it was just a random book that I've had on my shelves for a while. I loved the first one. I now have the third one as well, and I love Allie Hazelwood's writing. I think she is amazing, and the best part about this, in my opinion, is the fact that I am not a science person. Okay, science was my least favorite subject in school. I was not good at it, and I did not have a scientific brain. But the science elements and the project elements of both of the books that I've read by her are actually fascinating, and she does a really good job of kind of dumbing it down without it feeling like she's dumbing it down for people like me who don't know anything about science. So I really liked that because the project they were working on was really cool to learn about, and these helmets that were supposed to help astronauts, they were going to work with their brains. Every single helmet was attuned to that specific astronaut, and it was going to work with their cognitive function and make them, I think, have a better reaction time to things when they're in outer space. And it was just going to help them be a better person and be a better astronaut. And so I just thought that the way that they were describing this was really cool, and seeing how passionate Bee is, because we're in her head, but also Levi is just, I loved it. So if you want a fun, cozy rom-com, this is great. It's not, I think, as smutty as the first one was. I mean, it's smutty, but it's got its scenes like any other romance, but it's not particularly out there. And I feel like I remember a lot of buzz about the first one being particularly out there. So maybe not. Maybe I'm just making things up, but it was great. If you want the fun, cozy feelings, I would highly recommend this one. If you're worried about the science elements, take it from someone who was also worried about the science elements. Honestly, not the biggest part of this. It's just their jobs. And yes, while the entire plot revolves around it, it is just fun to learn about and easy to understand. So I loved this one so much. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing about Love on the Brain that is something I didn't process until a little bit later, is that there is definitely some sort of chronic illness representation within this book. Bee suffers from, I don't remember what exactly it is, but it's something where she passes out a lot. So she does talk about it, but they used sciencey words, and I'm not gonna lie, I definitely blanked out at that moment. But she has moments where she gets really overstimulated, or I think she's afraid of spiders, so if she sees a spider, she passes out. So things like that, where she just collapses. It's pretty normal for her, so she lives with it pretty normally. But I did want to mention that there is some chronic illness rep within here. I followed that up with another favorite. These two, I think, were my favorites of the month, and that was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Look, I have my own copy, and I've already tabbed it, and I might have already gone through and highlighted a bunch. Of course, now I can't show you because I can't figure out where. Here's one. I highlighted. Can you see? You don't care, but this makes me happy. This one also got 5 stars. I think I went into this one with lower expectations because of, not lowered maybe expectations. I still thought it was going to be very good, but it's been marketed as if you like, Schitt's Creek, and the character of Alexis in Schitt's Creek, our main character Piper, is very much like her, which is not a show that I've actually ever gotten attached to. I've tried watching it, I just haven't gotten attached to it quite yet. So I was worried about that. I've read something by Tessa Bailey where it didn't, it was fine, but it wasn't the most amazing thing I've ever read. And so I was kind of nervous going into this one, and it got 5 stars. I loved it. It's my new obsession. I clearly have this one. I went out and bought the first and then the other one in the series, which follows her sister. I am now a Tessa Bailey fan. So, she did the thing. So this book, let me tell you what this book's about. It is perfect for, I think, the end of summer, because it does kind of take place during summer, but I think it ends in the colder months. So it was really great to read at this time, but it doesn't really have anything to do with summer except for location, I guess, but that's beside the point. It follows our main characters, Piper and Brendan, and Piper is this kind of party girl who gets herself into one too many situations. So her stepdad is I'm done bailing you out, and so she and her sister, her mom remarried when they were really young, and so she and her sister don't know a whole lot about their dad, but their dad lived in this fishing town, and he owned a bar and has willed the bar to them. So the bar is theirs. The stepdad has just kind of been taking care of it until they're ready to have it. And so he's like, you know what? I'm done with you. I'm not spending any more money on you. I'm sending you to this town to take care of this bar for a few months. The mom's on board with this. The sister decides to go along with her, even though she doesn't need to, just to kind of give Piper peace of mind. And so they go to this small town, and she immediately runs into Brendan, who is a fish captain. And he is very stuck in his ways. He's very punctual. He has been married in the past, but it's been quite a few years since she passed, and he still wears a wedding ring. So you've got that whole situation. The town is very close. Everybody knows everybody. And Piper and her sister are just kind of thrown into it. Hannah, I believe her name is. So Piper and Hannah are just kind of thrown into it. And eventually they kind of find their feet, and it's the two of them as Piper kind of discovers what's really important to her in life, but also learning how to trust someone, because every relationship that she's been in has not gone well. They see her as one thing, and Brendan sees her as something very different. So if you couldn't tell, loved this book. It consumed me for a few days. I stayed up very late one night to finish it because, like I said, it wasn't that I was expecting this to be bad. I just went in not expecting it to be the most amazing thing I've ever read because of my experience with the other book by Tessa Bailey. But this one is twice as long, which I think is better for her. I think the story she was trying to tell, the one that I read previously, which was My Killer Vacation, just didn't have enough room to be fleshed out. So I think this one did. I think there was a lot more to our characters. I just loved it. I should not care about this small little fishing town in the middle of nowhere, but I do, and I love them. Okay? It's great. I can't wait to read the second one at some point because it follows Hannah, her sister, and Brendan's best friend, Fox. So I'm very excited about that. But I thought it was very well done. I understand the hype behind this book now. It's one of my favorite romances, contemporary romances. It's like on that list for sure. I get it. I get it. The next one I picked up was the fourth volume of Fence, and this one I ended up giving 4 stars to. So this was not the most exciting volume. I still think the third one is my favorite one so far, but what I liked about this one is now, at least as far as the story goes, this is about basically a fencing team coming together. And the first few volumes in this series is them basically being picked to be on said fencing team. Well, in the third volume, we have the team, and now we have started doing the actual competitions. And so this is their first competition in this volume. And they're all so very set in their ways, and they think that they need to be individuals rather than actually compete as a team. And so this is a lot about teamwork and really kind of having our main characters who have been at each other's throats this whole time actually starting to kind of become friends a little bit and get to know each other a little bit more. It ends on a particularly uplifting moment. So I am excited to pick up volume 5 at some point. I can't remember how many volumes are actually out because it's still coming out. And I know I've seen the 6th volume, but I can't remember if it's out or if that's the one that's coming out. But it's still in the process of being published, which is exciting and nerve-wracking because this means that now I've dedicated my time to a series that's not over, which means I'm not going to have an answer at the end of whatever volume is out, 5, I guess. And that's fine. That's fine. I really like this. It's a sporty kind of graphic novel. They're very short, obviously. The volumes are relatively short, but this one I would say is not my favorite, but it's probably my second favorite because of the whole them working as a team element. I liked seeing that, and I liked seeing our main characters who have been, like I said, at each other's throats this whole time, actually starting to be forced into being friends with each other. So I liked this a lot. It was very sweet. The next one I picked up was The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which is the third in the From Blood and Ash series. I gave this one 5 stars. Trigger warnings for this book: blood. Just blood and gore. I'm just going to put that out there. I hate bloody things. And obviously, based on what this book is about, if you've gotten far enough past the first volume or first book to know what this book is about, blood is a big part of this story, which is unfortunate for me, who got emotionally connected to the characters and then realized that there was an element of blood that I do not do well with. So these books are addictive, and yet I dread them. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I am obsessed with them. Clearly, I gave them 5 stars. I'm obsessed with their characters. I need to know what's going to happen. This one ended on a cliffhanger, but I would say not nearly as bad of a cliffhanger as the first 2 books. I do have the 4th one. I picked that one up a couple of months ago, so I can continue. I think the 5th one is out, and the 6th one's the one that's coming out, if I remember correctly. There's going to be a bunch in this series. I'm honestly worried about this series, but I love them. They're great. So this series, if you do not know and have been hiding under a rock for some reason, follows our main character Poppy. And in the first book, she is the maiden, which basically means that at some point in the future, she is going to be given to the gods. No one really knows what that's about except for like the people who are in charge, but she is kind of very well protected by the queen. So because of that, she cannot be looked upon. She wears all white. She wears a veil. She is not supposed to be able to like have her own opinions, and she's not supposed to be emotionally and romantically involved with anybody. And she's not supposed to like, there's certain emotions that she's not supposed to feel. And so it's her story, and it really gets kicked off when she gets a new bodyguard hawk. And so this is the 3rd one in the series. Many, 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 many things have happened since then. So like it's not the same person. It's not the same story. We have lots of things that are happening in the future. And there is a cliffhanger. She's really, really, really good at putting cliffhangers at the ends of her stories. But this one was more of a giant like F you rather than a oh my god what just happened moment, you know, like I know what happened, whereas in the first 2 books I was left with so many questions, whereas with this one, yes, there's questions, but it's more like, ooh, I can't wait to see what's next, you know. It's more excitement rather than confusion. Unlike the last couple of books, this one probably isn't my favorite. I would say the 2nd one is probably my favorite. I think it has the most romantic elements in it, and that's really my favorite part of this story. But the plots are amazing. The story is amazing. I am very excited to see where the next one is going to go. For a while, I was thinking that there was going to be an arc of the first 3, and then the others were going to be something else. But now that how this one ends, it's all one continual series. I don't know where I got that from, but I was very wrong. And it's just going to be one continual series. I think there is 7 planned, but like we could see more, because at one point there was only going to be 6, and I'm pretty sure I saw on Goodreads that there's going to be a 7th one. So there's way more. It is fantasy, romance. I love it. It's fantastic. It's got some elements that I don't love about it, which I mentioned, which is the whole blood gore thing, but it's not bad enough for me to stop. I'm too invested to stop. These are very fast-paced stories. You are on the edge of your seat. This one did take me a little bit longer than the other 2 to get into. I was usually into the first 2 books within the first 50 pages. This one I took probably about 100 to 200 pages to really get invested in what was going on, but I still really enjoyed it. I still really enjoy the plot. I still really love just kind of where we're going, because like every time we think we have an answer, we don't, and there's so much more to it. So the fact that this author is just really good at having such an expansive world, because like I would get so confused if this was my writing. Like I need a very simplistic world to like plan out. I would never be able to plan something as expansive as this. So kudos to her for being able to do that. I will say one thing that I find really interesting as well, these are fast-paced. You do have to really pay attention to the series. This is one that you can't just kind of like zone out of. I love audiobooks, and I have the audiobooks of these, but I find myself, when I've been reading these books, actually just having the audiobook in my ear and then picking up the physical book as well, and just following along for most of the story, because there's so much going on. It's so fast-paced, like I've been saying, and there's just a lot of world stuff going on. So these are bigger books, and these are probably going to take more focus than not, but just be wary, I guess, if you're interested in this series. But I loved it. I have 0 complaints with the series. Again, this one's not my favorite so far, but it still got 5 stars, so do with that what you will. The next one was my, I think, only historical romance of the month, and that is To Swoon and to Spar by Martha Waters. This is the 4th in her Regency Vows series, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I loved this book. I was very nervous, which I kind of talked about in my vlogs, but I was very nervous going into this one because the 3rd one, I think I'd hyped up too much in my head, and that one ended up getting 3 stars. It was still a really good story, but as far as the romance goes, I wasn't as emotionally invested in that one as I was in the first 2 in the series. The first one still, to this day, is my favorite in the series. I just think it's the best well-written. She has a very humorous writing style that is very, very present in the first one. It has kind of like I wouldn't say petered out because it's still funny, but it's not as funny. And I think it's just because of the characters and also the situations we find our characters in. But this one is a marriage of convenience hijinks situation. So we follow our main character, Pinvale, who we've met before. His sister was the second book, was her story. He's a Viscount and he really wants his ancestral home. It's, you know, right now it's being controlled and owned by his uncle, but his goal is to get it back. He has really good memories with it and he just wants it back. And he's been trying to buy it and this uncle just will not sell. And finally the uncle says, but okay, yes, I will finally sell it to you. But as a caveat to selling it for like a ridiculous amount of money, I'm going to make you marry my ward who's named Jane. Like that's going to be part of the deal. And he's like, okay. And so they meet up in London. They don't hit it off right away, but they both want this. He wants the house. She wants her freedom. They've decided this is what's going to happen. So they get married and it's their relationship at this house. But her whole thing is that she really wants this house to herself. She can't imagine why Pinvale would want to stay in the country. He's a city person. She hates London. It should be that he would stay in London and she would stay in the country, and that would be great. So her idea of trying to get rid of him is to make the house seem haunted. So this is really good for end of summer, beginning of fall. It does take place in like the winter months, so it's very cold, but because of all of the like haunting situations, you're kind of on the edge of your seat. It's not a thriller, it's funny, but it has thriller elements to it because of said hauntings. And you're in both of their perspectives. And so when you're in Pinvale's perspective and he doesn't know what's going on, it's all a little spooky. So because of that, this was a great introduction to kind of the fall mood that has officially hit my heart. I'm ready. So this was great to kind of get that kickstarted because of that whole like haunting situation was giving me fall vibes. But I loved them. I think I went into this book with low enough expectations because of how the third one went. And I also focused a lot on this book. And I don't know if I focused enough on the third one. So maybe the third one was just entirely my fault. But regardless, I really focused on them. I loved their relationship. I thought it was really, really sweet. And I honestly just could not get enough of the two of them together. Their banter was perfect. It's definitely, I would say, one of my favorites in the series. Like I said, the first one's still my favorite, but like this could very easily be like a very close second. And I just really enjoyed their story. Also, if there's anything about Martha Waters that sounds interesting to you and you're not someone who enjoys smut, this is probably the best book for you because her first couple of books were incredibly smutty, especially the second one. They were super, super smutty. And this one, like, honestly, I'm not even sure I would consider this smutty at all. Like it has a scene, but like nothing happens, kind of. If you are someone who doesn't like sex scenes, but you enjoy a good, funny story, here you go. It'll spoil all of the couples from the books before that, but beyond that, these are all kind of standalone stories. So I highly recommend this. I think it's so good. They're so cute. I love her writing. I don't know how else to hype up this book. I was very worried going in, and I shouldn't have been because it was fantastic. And now I'm back on the high of this series, and there's only one left. And I'm excited. I'm sad to see the series go, but I feel like we've reached a point where it makes sense. You know, this is the last couple in the kind of group, so it makes sense that like this is where we're going to end. The next one is Stoneheart by Katie Roberts. It was in this short collection or short story collection I've got. It was the first 75 pages or so. It's like a prequel to the Dark Olympus series by Katie Robert, which I have loved that series. It's a Greek mythology retelling of sorts set in modern day. Every book in that series is like a different myth or different characters reimagined. This one follows Medusa and Calypso. So instead of giving this one 3 stars, I didn't give it 3.5 stars, but it was fine. Like, I don't have a lot of strong opinions about this story because I liked the characters of Medusa and Calypso. As far as short stories go, it was a pretty good one. I am very iffy when it comes to novellas and things like that because I just need a lot more than what novellas are going to give me. So it needs to be characters I already have a personal connection to for me to really care about them. This one is a world that I have personal connection to, so maybe that's why it worked. But as far as the character development within this, it was pretty good for how short it was. So I liked that element. I will say trigger warnings for assault. It was historical, so like it's not on the page, she just kind of thinks about it. And then also a couple times I think someone gets drugged in here, so just kind of be wary of that. But the whole idea behind this is that Medusa is an assassin for Athena, and she is sent to kill Calypso, who is Odysseus's mistress, and Odysseus is the one who kind of like sent them. He is a jerk, and he has been having an affair, and he, instead of being an adult and just ending it, he thinks it's going to be easier just to have her killed because there's so much bad blood between her family and his family. So Medusa is sent to kill Calypso, and it goes from there. It was a good story, but it didn't really, I think, add to the Dark Olympus world as a whole. Her short stories are usually pretty good about adding something to the world and adding something to our characters. For this one, these were brand new characters, and I liked them as characters, don't get me wrong, but like, we were introduced to Hades in this, which is what the first book in the series follows, and anything that we learned about Hades in this world, we learned in Dark Olympus, or the first book in Dark Olympus, which is Neon Gods. So it wasn't like we were learning anything particularly new for this world. So it was more like I enjoyed my time, but I didn't see the purpose of it in the grand scheme of things. So I liked it. I'm glad I read it, because now I know, and I have been wanting to read it. So like, it's good to have that finally know what it was about, but it wasn't like the next most amazing thing I've ever read, and it was just kind of, it was fine. You know, it was just kind of fine. The next book I picked up was because in the month of August, as many of us, I think, did, a movie adaptation of Red, White, and Royal Blue came out. And like many of us, I became obsessed with it. And now, that also helped, I think, contribute to my wanting lots of contemporary romances, because I picked up Husband Material by Alexis Hall next, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. This is the second in this series. The first one was Boyfriend Material. I'm discovering now, based on Goodreads, the series is actually called London Calling, and there's going to be a third one. It's called Father Material. It comes out next year, and I have so many questions. But this world follows our main two characters, Luke and Oliver. And in the first book, they both have different situations within their lives. Luke's father is this big rock star guy who's never been in his life. He's actually a total jerk. And Oliver has a very strained relationship with his family. And due to Luke falling a certain way and some history with Luke, the tabloids get a hold of a picture of him and assume that he was drunk. And so he has been working with a nonprofit to protect dung beetles. How freaking random is that, right? So that's his job, and his boss basically tells him that he needs to get it together, or he's not going to be able to like do the things that he wants to do. So he ends up meeting up with Oliver, who is like one of his friends knows Oliver, and they agree to have a fake relationship for cameras for Luke, and then also Luke's going to be Oliver's date to his parents' like anniversary. And so it's their relationship. This one continues after the events of the first book. I have had zero interest in picking this up once this year until this month. And then I said, well, we got to capitalize on this because who knows when that's going to happen again. So I picked it up, and I very much enjoyed this book. It was not as good as the first one, in my opinion. This one is one of the things I would say is my biggest issue, and the reason it didn't get 5 stars is because this book is Luke and Oliver. It's split into 5 sections. It's heavily influenced, and the author even said this, it's heavily influenced by 4 Weddings and a Funeral, that movie, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, that's right, yeah, that movie, which I still need to watch at some point because I'm very curious about it, but it's very heavily influenced by that. So these two are going to all of these weddings and a funeral of their friends, and at one point an ex-boyfriend, and like all these crazy things. So like, it's them being forced into all of these situations where like love is thrown at their faces, and they're just kind of like reevaluating and thinking about their own relationship. It is 2 years, I believe, after Boyfriend Material ended. So it's been a while. And so it's the two of them figuring some stuff out. And while that's important, and they have a lot of really deep, important conversations in here, and I loved that they had all these very important conversations, they fought a lot. And in my opinion, it was the same, like 2 fights over and over and over again. And so I kind of got tired of that because, yes, I'm very conflicted about this because I understand why they had so many arguments. I understand why these conversations were important, and they were important, and they needed to talk about all these issues before they ever took anything to the next level, but they just kept harping over and over, it felt like. And then they also, you throw in how they both have very different ways of handling things, and, you know, Oliver's, for example, Oliver, his thing is after he talks it out, he needs to kind of shut down for a little bit and then he'll come back to it. There's just like a few things that, like, personality-wise, it's their coping mechanisms and how things are very different, and how they grew up is very different and things like that. And so I liked this book because there was a lot of struggle in here, which made them so much stronger. And like I said, all of these conversations were very, very important. Like, one of the big central conversations within this book is how each of them relate to their own sexuality. They're both gay, but they both approach the LGBTQ plus community in a very different way. And so they have that conversation a lot. And so this is a book of, I think, very important conversations and things that should be happening. And obviously I'm not the target audience, so kind of just like put that out there in the ether. But at the same time, I understand all these conversations and why they're important, and that's great. And I love it. I wish it could have been condensed into less fighting, if that makes sense. I'm making it sound like the book is just fighting, and that's not what it is. It's just like they have to have all these important conversations so that when they move on to whatever the next step is, they can do so with like clear understanding of where the other one is. So with that being said, I loved it. I'm now back on the hype train. I'm obsessed with Alexis Hall as an author. I've done a deep dive, and I have so many books of his on my TBR at this point. I just keep reading and wanting to read things. Like, I have an arc from him that I'm hoping to read in, what month are we in? September. It comes out next month. So like, there's so much about this author that I love, and he's got a fan of me for sure, and I'm obsessed. So even though I said a bunch of negative things about this, I still really loved this story, and it was amazing. It was amazing, and this was the perfect time to read it. The next one, another contemporary romance, shock, is The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I finally read another Beth O'Leary book. I was very, very, very nervous about reading Beth O'Leary books because I started with her most recent one, which was The No-Show, and you guys know how I feel about The No-Show. It was immaculate, one of my favorite books of all time. I went into this one, and I think I went in knowing that there's no way this one was going to reach the same level as The No-Show, because The No-Show was just such a good one to start with, and I'm kind of starting with all of her older stuff. So I went in knowing that, and this one still blew me away. It got 4.5 stars. I adored this book. It was very good. Not as good as The No-Show, clearly, because it didn't get 5 stars, but that one's just it's just way too up there. I'm not sure anything can reach it, to be honest. This follows our main two characters, Dylan and Addie, and this book starts with the two of them. They have a mutual friend who's named Cherry. 4 years ago, they met at Cherry's villa. Dylan was just visiting. Addie, was working there, and they struck up a friendship, which turned into a summer romance, which turned into an almost year-long relationship. Then they break up for certain reasons. We don't really know what those are, and 4 years later, they are both on the way to Cherry's wedding. They get in a car accident with each other. The car that Dylan is in, which has him and his best friend, Marcus, it gets totally destroyed, and Addie is there with her sister and this other guy that's just kind of tagging along, and so the 5 of them have to pile into her little baby car to go to Cherry's. And so the purpose, like, this whole book takes place over the course of, I think, 2 or 3 days, and it switches back and forth between present and past as we're like learning kind of what happened and why they broke up. So trigger warnings for this book: sexual assault, it's on the page, and homophobia. They definitely have some things that are said in here that I've questioned a few things, and I'm pretty sure it's not the author. It's like I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it's a character being homophobic. So just be wary of those 2 things. But I was very excited to start this. I wasn't really sure what I was getting into, and it was amazing. She has such a way with taking these characters. Like, this is a pretty character heavy story. The plot is them in a car. Like, it's not a very like exciting plot, but it's them reliving different elements of their relationship and kind of getting us caught up as to how it ended, why it ended, things like that. What I really liked about this is that because it's been 4 years, these characters, both Addie and Dylan and Marcus, who, like I said, is Dylan's best friend, he's a pretty big part of the story. They all 3 have had a lot of changes in their lives. They've kind of reevaluated themselves as people, so they all are starting from kind of a different point. So they're not the same people that they were when Dylan and Natty were together 4 years ago. So I liked that because you do see changes from the first page, and I really liked that because this is a very therapy positive book, which is awesome. So you have all of our characters dealing with whatever it is they need to deal with, and they go about it in a very adult way. So love them, love this book, very good. It reminds me of People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. So if you like that dual timeline and you like that story, this has a very similar feel to that. And I loved it. Like, I tabbed a pretty good amount of this book. And it was great. Honestly, it was great. Oh, one thing I found really interesting about this book is the character of Dylan is obsessed with poetry. Like, that's his whole thing, is he wants to be a poet. And he comes from money, which is one of the things that they used to fight about. And because of that, he kind of has kept his poetry hidden, but he looks at the world in a very poetic lens. And because of that, he has a very kind of flowery way of seeing things. And it gives me dark academia vibes. Like, it's not dark academia, obviously, because no school and it's not a dark story per se, but the way that he looks at the world is very reminiscent of like how the books that I've read that are dark academia, their characters look at the world. So if you are a dark academia fan and you want a contemporary romance to try out, here's an option. Also, audiobook is a really good way to go because it's dual POV, so it's got dual narrators, and honestly, they made this book. It was very well done. I liked it. I really liked it. I was not sure what to expect going in, and it ended up being very, very good. The next book I picked up was my nonfiction, which was Green River Running Red, and this is by Anne Rule. This one I ended up giving 3 stars to because I'm discovering that I like the idea of true crime. Okay, I don't like how I phrase that. I like true crime. You guys know this. I particularly like Bailey Sarian here on YouTube, and I think podcasts, for me, are the best way to do true crime because the longer the story, the less I'm invested in what's going on. And also, if it's contemporary versus historical, I find historical way more interesting for some reason. So this one was tough to get through because it was it was a pretty short story. As far as like audiobooks go when it comes to true crime, it's pretty short. It's only about 6 hours. So the first portion of this book is our author kind of going through the events of what led to our murderer getting caught. And this is a serial killer that takes place, I can't remember what state it's in, but it's by this place called the Green River. And he particularly targeted people who were sex workers. So that was a fun thing to learn about. So we're learning about all of these girls and where they came from. So great. Awesome. But it was very repetitive. It was very much everybody was the same because he had a type. And so they all got like mixed in my head. And then about halfway through, that's kind of when he got caught. And then we started to hear his side of things. And then we started to have them building the case against him. And it was things like that. So like the second half, I think, was more interesting than the first half. I find rating these to be very weird because you're rating someone's life. So like just nonfiction in general, I always find very bizarre to rate. But I gave this one 3 stars, and I think it was because I felt like I was kind of trudging through. Like I wanted to know what was going on, and I was interested in the story, but I did feel like I was kind of trudging through to get to the end. And I think I just need them in shorter formats. Like for me personally, I think they need to be historical. And if they're not historical, I need them in like a podcast or like a Bailey Sarian or something like that, where I think they just have a more interesting way of telling the story rather than like a narrator just reading the story. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I was interested. I'm glad I read it because I didn't know this one at all. But it wasn't like my new favorite. You know, it was just kind of like very middle of the road. I read it to read it. It's kind of where we're at. The next one I picked up was another contemporary romance. Shock. It was by the book, and this one was by Jasmine Guillory. It is the second in the Meant to Be series, which is a series of books that are all reimaginings of fairy tales, but from different authors. I have the first one in this series, which is by Julie Murphy, and it's If the Shoe Fits, and that one's a Cinderella retelling. This one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but takes place during publishing, so that's really fun. We have our main character, Izzy, who is at a publishing house. She's been there for a couple of years, and she has been getting, like, no recognition. She's not happy. She's one of the like token Black people there. It's her and one other girl who are there. So they bond about that. They're talking about publishing in the industry, being Black in the publishing industry. So there's a lot of that conversation as well. But her story really kicks off when they have a memoir that is supposed to be sent to them by this guy named Beau, who is, his dad was a screenwriter, so that's kind of why he's been popular. I mean, he's done stuff, but like, it's more like who his parents were, and that's why he's popular. But he was going to write a memoir, and they've basically got nothing from him. And so she decides to take the initiative and just show up at his house and figure out what's going on. So she does. And then they strike up a deal, and she ends up staying there with him while he writes the memoir and helps him out. And it's their story. So I gave this one 4 stars because I really enjoyed it. I think they had a lot of really cute moments. You can very clearly see all of the hints that Jasmine Guillory has done in connection to Beauty and the Beast. But I loved their story. I loved them as people. I think they have one of the most realistic adult romances, because even if they have a fight or they have a disagreement or they have like some sort of issue, they both take the time they need and then they come back and talk about it. And you don't see that a lot. So I just loved that. I don't think it's the most amazing thing I've ever read. I don't think it's going to stick with me particularly for a long time. Like, there's definitely elements of this book that I've already forgotten. So I don't think it is the most amazing thing in the world, but I had a lot of fun when I was reading it. And that was the important part to me, was the actual process of reading it was very fun. And it was on my list of books to read before the end of the year, and I did it. So that's exciting. So yes, if you want just like a nice little palate cleanser, fun story that does have a little bit of maybe some more conversations, like I said, about, you know, publishing industry and being Black in publishing and things like that, then they do have those conversations in here, and those are important conversations. But as far as the grand scheme of books goes, it was very good, but like, I'm not going to remember it probably in like a couple of months. All right, the next one that I picked up was Deadly Dreams by T.J. Sutton, and I gave this one 5 stars. I very much enjoyed the story. I really, really, really love this series. So this one is the hardest to get through, I think, and that is because of the subject matter. So trigger warnings for this one, because there's always a lot. I mean, every single book has an entire content warning page so that you know what you're getting into before you get into it. But the ones that stuck out to me were PTSD from sexual assault, trauma from sexual assault, and then attempted sexual assault. So there's quite a few things. This one also, I think, says just PTSD in general. There's murder, gore, sex, stuff like that. But that's more like general overarching plot things. Like, they happen in a lot of the books rather than this one specifically. So this was definitely the hardest to read because of the events of the very, very end of the second book. There's a lot of trauma that goes into this book. We have a lot of, actually there's quite a few characters who are dealing with a lot of trauma in this book. And so I was very worried going into it what we were going to be getting into. I thought we were going to be in their heads quite a lot, but I forgot about the character of Fortuna Swoon and how her thing is to just kind of like keep going. Like, yes, deal with your problems, but like her way of dealing with them is to just kind of like keep at it. You can't let them overpower you. You have to keep going. And because of that, it made the plot continue. So this was important. There's a lot of really important conversations within this book, but I really enjoyed our main 2 characters. Just like as a couple, I think they're very, very sweet. And I am so interested because the last 2 have had events that were kind of cliffhangers, and like not cliffhangers, but like they had big important events that happened right before the end of the book, but there weren't particularly like any really big cliffhangers. This one had a cliffhanger, and I'm genuinely afraid because the 4th one is 200 pages, I think, more. Like, this one's almost just over 500 pages. The 4th one is over 700 pages, and I am genuinely terrified of that book. Like, I don't even know what's going to happen. There's so much that could happen, but I love the story. I love the characters. The first one in the series, if you don't know, follows our main character, Fortuna Swoon, who's a nightmare. And that basically means that she has this ability to, if she can touch you, then she can tell what your biggest fear is and use it against you. And so The story starts with her. She is one of the Glass Nightmares, except for her brother, who has been missing for 2 years, and everyone's just kind of assumed that he is dead. They don't really know what happened. He's a cold case. No one will ever figure it out. But she is convinced that he's still alive out there, and she gets approached by this fae from, I believe, the Unseelie court. I can never remember who's Seelie and who's Unseelie, but both courts are in this series. But I believe he's Unseelie, and he basically says, like, I can help you out. I know some stuff. I can help you out, figure out what happened to your brother, what's going on, but in order to do that, you have to marry me. And she's like, fine. And so they go to the Unseelie court, and it's much more than that now, but that's kind of where the story starts. And these are not easy books to get through. Like, the world itself is a very, very brutal world. There's all kinds of different magical creatures that are talked about in this series. Like, so far, you have fae, you have nightmares, you have vampires, you have zombie-esque things, you have witches, you have werewolves. I think we saw a griffin at one point. There's a dragon. Like, there's everything in this book. There's so much going on. And I'm sure we're not at the end. I'm sure things are going to be even more, because we're only halfway through the series at this point. If she does only do 6 like she's planning, there's so much that could happen. So I loved this one. Not my favorite in the series. I still think the second, well, actually, I don't know. I think I have some of my favorite moments are in this book, but this isn't my favorite book in the series. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I can't figure out actually which one is my favorite in the series. But they're all got 5 stars. She has a way of kind of having you on the edge of your seat and being like obsessed with what's going on. The next one is the book that I DNF'd, and that was Earth, and this is by Helen J. Perry. This one, it was honestly low intrigue and awful writing was the reason I decided to DNF this one. I picked this one up because I needed a book with Earth in title for one of my prompts. This was the only thing I could think of. I went down a rabbit hole and I found some things, and this is the one that won that. It was really short. It was a Kindle Unlimited story. I was thinking it was going to be really good. It was a reverse harem, supposedly, but I only got 30% of the way through because I just could not care. I tried. I picked it up a couple of times and tried to keep reading it, but I was getting to the end of the readathon. I didn't want to pick it up, and I decided just to switch it for something else. So it was very confusing. I was even like explaining it on a Zoom call to my friend Lauren about kind of what had happened, and I was kind of giving her all this information, and I was like, we're less than 50 pages, I want to say, maybe about 50 pages into this story. Why do we have so much plot? Why is there so much that's happening? And it was just very confusing, and I didn't care. So I decided to say goodbye to that one, and instead I picked up It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, and this is by Zoe Thorogood. This is a nonfiction graphic novel memoir. So, trigger warnings for this one for talks about suicide. It is this author's deep dive over the course of 6 months into her mental health. It's about the time of COVID where she was at home. I think it was near the end of COVID, I want to say, because she does make a trip to New York. She's from the UK. So she does make a trip to New York at the end of the story. And it was, I've never read anything by this author. I didn't even know this author existed, to be honest. And I think this was probably not the best way to be introduced to her stuff, but I'm not the audience. Let me just start there. I am not the audience. This is definitely for people who are in a very similar situation to her, where she is very much isolated and not happy with her life. And so she basically just writes all of her thoughts down and makes a book out of them. So they are very stream of consciousness. They are very chaotic and all over the place. There's not really any rhyme or reason to them, which I think is important for her. It was her way of getting everything in her head out onto the page. Awesome, great. But I found that very confusing. I'm not the biggest fan of her art style, to be honest. It's very like horror manga vibes, and that is just not my thing. So I know that there's definitely people out there that love her stuff and would find a lot of hope in a book like this, but I was not it. So I'm glad I read it. I am, because it was an important story, and I think it's important for her to have this story out in the world and have people read it. And it's very, like, it touches on a very dark topic, which is suicide and suicidal ideation, and just having a really hard time being on your own, and the voices in your head telling you to do certain things, and just like all of these things that I think are really important to talk about. I just don't think I was the target audience for them, which is totally fine. So I did end up giving it 3 stars because I thought I liked the idea behind this, and I liked everything about it made sense. It just wasn't my favorite thing in the world, and that is fine. So that's what I ended the month off with. Not the most exciting thing, but I had some really, really amazing reads throughout the month. Again, it was definitely my contemporary romance month, and I love my time reading, and it's definitely transitioned into the beginning of September for sure. Like I'm just gobbling up all of the romances. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. As always, let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or if you participated in the Magical Readathon, how your reading went. Did you complete your career? I did at the very last second, but let me know if you had any extra stuff that you were doing. Just tell me all the things. Or if you didn't participate in the Magical Readathon, what is some of your favorite books that you read in the month of August? But if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so go check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!